Well, we're going to go ahead and get started here tonight just for intents of introductions and everything like that. This is the February 13th, 2020. This is kind of the initial session for breaking growth barriers here in Minnesota. We're real happy to have you with us here tonight, Brother McKee, all the way down
Good to be here.
all the way down in Houston,
Yes, sir.
Texas. So just follow the interstate and keep going south.
Yes, sir. Wait till the snow disappears.
Well,
no snow here.
No snow, eh?
No, sir.
Well, we have plenty of that to share. So kind of the point and purpose of this initiative is to help our churches and pastors in our district to kind of identify what are some areas of barriers to growth, and in identifying those, how to strategically and intentionally break through some of those. And so we've kind of opened up the forum to ask you to kind of help some of our pastors who are facing that barrier of 150, and then kind of plus what some of those other barriers are.
Certainly.
And how to kind of break some of the cycles in our churches, and help identify like what those barriers actually look like. Do they exist?
Sure.
Are they real?
Yes.
And how do you begin to kind of move through some of those? So I would say I'd like to give you a warm welcome, but we don't have enough warmth here to share. It's probably, I don't know, 20 degrees below zero here. So
well, I think it's around 70 here outside.
That's wonderful. That's great.
Yes.
So,
well, hey, it's great to be here. And of course, it's an honor to speak to all of the wonderful ministers of the Minnesota district. I don't claim to be an expert. Hopefully, we can at least have great conversation here tonight, and I can share some things that have worked here for us and some principles that we have picked up and gleaned from other pastors. And so church growth is something we're all passionate about. Someone once told me, and all the pastors, all the dealings that pastors have with people in their church, having more people solves most of them. A revival takes care of most of your problems. One of the fascinating things that I think about the Apostle Paul's in the midst of him talking to Timothy about all of the shipwrecks and the beatings and, boiled in oil and everything else that he went through, he compared the weight of the church right in there with all of the other troubles that he had faced. And so pastors are overworked typically, and yet fight a lot of guilt, a lot of anxiety. And sometimes, let's be honest, we even fight anger with people, at least speaking personally, frustration, anger with people because they're not getting on board with our vision, and they don't seem to have an idea or grasp where we're going, what we're doing. And so hopefully I can speak to some of those frustrations today and maybe help you to think about something that you haven't considered that would take some of the pressure off of you, at the same time help the church that you're pastoring with your unique challenges to possibly to grow and to get some momentum. I don't claim to be an expert. My pastor used to say an expert is somebody that's more than 50 miles away from home. And but I don't claim to be an expert, but I do love to talk about church growth, and this is something that we do a lot. I've written a lot on, and I do enjoy this subject, and God has helped us to get connected with some people that are experts, and I'm just very grateful for that. It is in North America. There was a study done, I think, probably about 8 years ago. I believe it was by the Hartford Research Institute, that said that 59% of church attenders in North America attend a church that's less than 100 people. So 59% of people that attend church regularly, that's more than 3 times a month, attend a church with only 100 or less members. And so that's quite a range of attendees. There is an additional 35% that attend a church that's 100, I believe, to 500. And so, together, what is that? 94% of the church attendees in North America attend a church that's under 500 members. And yet most of the time we would consider a church over 100 people to be a larger church in our movement. I really feel like we need to redefine that. And I really want us to have the kind of church growth, and I know all of you do, that that we could say that in the apostolic movement, not only in the United Pentecostal Church, but in the apostolic movement, we could start redefining what a small church looks like. And a small church for us could be 200 or 250. But the truth is, there are a lot of great pastors out there that are doing a tremendous job, and they're reaching their community. And let's be honest, some communities, a 50-member church would be a large church. I remember years ago evangelizing, and I preached in a small town up in the panhandle of Texas, and the attendance of the church that night was 250 people, but the town's population was 380. And so, I mean, he literally had more than half of the population of the city attending his church. So be careful not to judge, you know, your church or your success as a pastor on somebody else's scale. I think we do need to lighten the load on ourselves a little bit. We started the church. Let me tell you a little bit about our situation. We started the church here in Katy coming up in March 20 years ago. And we started with a small group of people. I think we had a total of 17 that we started with. There had been another small apostolic church that about 3 months before we launched. I met the board, got approval, and then we launched. There'd been a small church that had shut its doors. The pastor had throat cancer. And so those 17 people came over and started attending church with us. Katy at the time, there had been a lot of guys that had come to Katy, which is on the west side of Houston, try to get something started, but had not. So it was an interesting place. I never really wanted to come back to Texas. I wanted to go to downtown Los Angeles or Chicago or somewhere, you know, in a really metro area, but God sent us here. And so there were several things that we did in the beginning. Some of them were I would probably say most of them were mistakes, things that we tried that did not work. And I could talk for an hour about all of those things. But there were some great resources that I came across early on that really helped us sort of gain some momentum really, really quickly. We were very blessed. Just for the sake of transparency, we didn't have a building. We were meeting in the Assembly of God Church, their youth room, which they kept turning the AC off. And I know you guys all have wonderful building situations, and for all of you guys that lease and use other people's buildings, you can appreciate it. But they would turn the AC off because it was costing too much money. So we called that little room the fiery furnace. It was so hot. And but we met there for about 6 months to a year, and then we moved over, started leasing out on an off times the Presbyterian church. So we went from Assembly of God to Presbyterian, and but it was an interesting journey. And then our second year there, we were blessed to receive a Church in a Day grant, which was an incredible blessing. We had purchased a piece of property. I did not think that we could get Church in a Day. I'd actually been turned down for it. I applied for every grant with the United Pentecostal Church and was turned down for every one of them, including Church in a Day the first time. And I kept applying, and eventually, before it was over with, I got them all. And with the exception of She's for Christ. She's for Christ never got that, but we applied. We got it. Ladies, Ladies Auxiliary back then, Home Missions, Christmas for Christ, all of those, we were very blessed with a lot of those. So much of what we did early on was the result of some tremendous blessing. We got in Church in a Day. That was probably the catalyst for our growth. And we went from no one knowing who we were to suddenly having all of this publicity. And it was a bit overwhelming at the time. It was the first Church in a Day that they had attempted in a metro area. And so all of the television stations were out, had helicopters circling overhead.
Oh, wow.
It was an interesting time. We were actually went live on Good Morning America that picked us up. And of course, they were mocking us and making fun of us, but still, it was publicity.
Right.
And anyway, but it was a great blessing. The lead story 5 days in a row. So we had a lot of folks visit because of that. But that momentum was short-lived, and then we had to start implementing some practices and some processes that kind of helped keep us moving forward. And anyway, fast forward, we've been here for 15 years. We've gone through 5 building programs, and we are about to launch on a new sanctuary, and I'm very excited about that. We are in the middle of a capital campaign trying to raise just a little bit of money. So anyway, that's our story. That's where we're coming from. We have a great staff on hand, and a lot of people that love this kind of discourse and conversation. And so some of the systems that I'd like to share with you, or some of the things we've tried, I don't want to take credit for them. Some of this was created by our team, and our team, God has kind of brought together a unique group of people that we've been very blessed to kind of work alongside. So that's my introduction. And do you have any questions, or
No,
ready for us to?
So in that 20 years, let's say that things have been rolling kind of, and we are talking about some of the numerical breakthrough. Is that something, maybe how far into that, is that something you experienced that you started to notice some of those, maybe some of the barriers?
Sure. I'll give you our numbers as a breakdown, and I'm only giving this, I'm just so you kind of understand the process of our journey. About 4 months into it, we broke 60 for the first time. I remember that service because I went home and I told my wife, it finally feels like a church. It doesn't feel like a Bible study anymore. Having at least 60 people in the church, that was wonderful. When we moved over to the Presbyterian church in year 2, we had a few services. It wasn't by any means our normal attendance, but I think we probably had about 6 services where we broke 100. It was mostly, there was a large family that came, Hispanic family that came. They probably had 16, 17 people. Anytime they showed up, we broke our record. Church in a day, when we moved into it, we had this big surge. We were averaging a little over 100, about 120 or so. And then summertime came and it just bottomed out. We were in the 40s again, and I thought everything was falling apart.
Wow. Okay.
And it was like, the doors are going to close, and
so after that church in a day, kind of were doing about 120 thereabouts for a while, and then you said after summer, it went down, or during summer, it went down to 40s.
Yeah, in the 40s. Now, I'll tell you this. I remember after being in the church in a day building for a few months, on Sunday morning. Now, we had Sunday school that started at the same time, so we weren't the only ones on the property. But
Sure.
we, God had kind of worked a miracle out where we had been able to purchase some modular buildings. So we had some of our Sunday school teachers over next door. But I remember Sunday morning, I'm starting the adult Sunday school class, and it was my wife, myself, and 2 people. And so those moments really challenge you, and they cause you to really question whether or not you have the strength to stick it out and make things work. I will tell you, though, that those times were very important to me personally, developing as a leader, because it helped me to understand the power of attendance trend. And we had always tracked our numbers, but it was during that first summer slump that we became very passionate about tracking numbers. And I'd always track numbers. Last Sunday we had 80. This Sunday we have 90. So we're doing better. We got 10 more people than last week. And that's the way that a lot of pastors track their numbers. But churches grow by the law of retrogression. and it's a much more gradual. So retrogression basically is how the tide comes in and out. It'll come in 4 foot, go out 5, come in 3, go out 1, come in 2, and you never see just a rush of growth. It's much more gradual, kind of like you see the stock market tick up and down, up and down. So it's a gradual thing. That's the way I feel like churches grow. But oftentimes as pastors, we become frustrated because, man, last Sunday we had our record-breaking service. Man, it was awesome. Great numbers last Sunday. This Sunday, we're down by 50 people. And so we started tracking our numbers not by Sunday to Sunday, but this Sunday versus the same Sunday 1 year previous. So, this is Valentine's weekend. We would compare Valentine's weekend 2020 with Valentine's weekend 2019, and to really see whether or not we're growing. Also keeping track of all of our numbers so we can tell, hey, youth class is down, preteen class is down. We have Sunday school, nursery even, our Spanish services, all of the things that we track now. We didn't have a lot of those things back then, but we tracked as much as we could. And what it has done for us in the long run in tracking, it all started during those times, but has helped us so much in spotting not just the growth. It's not just a matter of encouragement, but it allowed us to start spotting some trends.
Okay.
And I remember we were probably at the time, several years ago, maybe 6 years ago, we were running at the time in the high 400s, 500, something like that. And I remember seeing this spike. We started noticing a spike every August, the end of August, around the 24th or so. Had we not tracked our numbers year to year, we could never have pulled up that data. And the reason why it was important is because we started planning a big service for the following Sunday, the last Sunday in August, or the first Sunday in September, however it worked out, so that we have this natural group of people, this boost of attendance, and there was no reason for it. It wasn't a special service, but we figured out that it was the Sunday after all the kids got back in school, so that everybody's back in school, they get in a routine, and suddenly everybody shows up at church. Of course, they forget about it, and they start getting involved in activities, and the attendance goes down again. So we planned a big service for that following weekend, so that when everybody showed up, we could point them towards some big thing that was happening the following Sunday. Anyway, little things like that really helped us, but a lot of it came from that low time in that first summer. Yeah. A long time ago. Yeah. But anyway, so again, keeping track of your numbers is not just a pride thing. It's important because it's going to help you to spot problems as a pastor later on. Maybe not right now, you'll notice it, but later on, those numbers will start speaking to you. For example, the more that we've grown. Now, when I was running, say, 50 to 100 people, I could look at, I kind of knew what was happening in every area of the church. There wasn't much that got past me. I mean, things did at times. Now, our average attendance on Sundays is around 640 or so. The full attendance of unique people that come every week is 700. I don't know those people. I would say a vast majority of the people, if you were to pull me out and say, what's their name? I honestly could not tell you. Sure. And I would love to be able to. I feel guilty because I don't. But at the same time, it's just not reality. I can't have a relationship with all those people. Couldn't name all the kids' names. And so the same is true with all your departments. You're going to have a Sunday school class that begins to shrink. Mm-hmm. And the first time you hear about it is when parents are ready to leave the church because of something that happened in the youth class. And you lost momentum 4 months ago, but if you weren't looking at the numbers, you would never know that. And so having access to those numbers every week, and I'd be happy to share with you. I'll share the document. You can put it in the comments, I think, in this, that you can take a look at kind of what I get every Monday. Now, it hasn't always looked like it does now, so I don't want anybody to look at it and think I can't put all this together. Don't worry. Sure. It was pretty basic early on, but at least gave us the numbers that help us now to actually track trends. And The church, remember, it's an ebb and flow, and you're going to have up Sundays and down Sundays. Most of the down Sundays followed a big up Sunday. And, that started talking to us. Why? Why is it that Easter Sunday, you have this record-breaking attendance, but the weekend after Easter Sunday, it plummets?
Yeah.
I mean, and so that may not be for everybody, but at least the church that we have in our other campuses, it seems common, a threat. So we have to try to do something to bring those numbers up. We need to try to bring everybody back the following weekend after a big Sunday. And so we adopted this new policy that anytime we have a big Sunday, we never have a big event without having something we promote on that big event that's happening at least 2 weeks later. It can be the following Sunday or the Sunday following, but in the next 2 weeks after a big Sunday, we need to have some big event so that when that big Sunday is happening, we're talking about, you guys need to come back and visit with us. So always have something on the back burner.
Okay.
Anyway, that's just a few of the ways that the numbers help.
Yep.
And is that at least we've been able to glean from and figure out, even when you have an attendance dip, sometimes it's helpful to know, you have a drop of, say, 20 people over this service, same service last year, 20 people. Well, then you look at your numbers and your adults may be actually higher. But the youth class is smaller than it was last year. And so, it might have been that there was 2 families on vacation. They take their, 20 kids with them. Sure. And so it hits you in a big way. But if you don't have that data, then it's easy to kind of get lost week to week.
Sure.
And by the way, I don't create this document. We have a lady in the church that really has no other ministry. She's just somebody that knows how to create Excel. She goes and gets the numbers from the ushers, and that's all she does now. And then she sends it out. That's her ministry. But anyway, moving on from numbers.
All right. Yes. So moving on from there, since we are kind of like looking at that, at maybe the existence of growth barriers, can you comment on that at all? Like, is that something that, because it's kind of hard, it's kind of one of those things, it's a little hard to kind of wrap around conceptually, at least, what that actually is. Is that something that you experience in kind of?
Absolutely. Now, again, I didn't notice a lot of the growth barriers, and if you've read anything about it, I think it's Michael Fletcher's book, Roadblocks. Hold on a second, I've got it right here. It's Overcoming Barriers to Growth, Michael Fletcher. Okay. And great book on it. Carl George has got another one, How to Break Growth Barriers. One of my favorites, actually, Michael Fletcher's book is really good. Also, Bill Easom and Bill Cornelius have a great book on this called Go Big. Now, you'll notice that when you're reading through a lot of these books, their numbers are not, they're not, I don't think they're reality. I think, they look at a small church as anything low, smaller than 500 people. I don't think that we would look at it that way at all. Sure. But again, church growth barriers are a big deal, and there's a lot of data, a lot of research about it. For example, a church that's less than 50, you can determine what the number one, or on average, research says that the biggest problem pastors are going to face of churches not under 50, it's under 100. Any church under 100, the number one problem that pastors have to deal with is who's in charge. Once you get beyond that, the problems tend to change. And from 100 up to 250, the number one issues that 100 up to 300, the number one issue is interpersonal relationships. Just people crossing over, you're in my turf, you're in my ministry. There's just interpersonal relationships. People, it starts getting crowded. And if you haven't made room for more ministries, you start getting a lot of territorialism, things like that. Over 500, the problems tend to change, and it becomes the number one issue is money or morality. And it's what pastors tend to deal with. 500 was a big deal. And research says that most church splits occur when a church is approaching or hitting 500 in membership. So that's something that everyone can look forward to. And, but I remember back when we were kind of hitting that point, though. I'll just say this about church growth barriers in general. Go Big by Bill Easton. That book really ministered to me during that season, because one of the things that it said is when you hit that church growth barrier, at least at that point, you're probably going to lose a large majority of your secondary staff. So, the leaders that you've raised up, that you've empowered, assistants or, Sunday school superintendents, get ready, because a lot of them are going to quit during the season. And there is some science behind it. One of the reasons is because as you're approaching 500, there is a need for more leaders. And if you have been pouring yourself into this group of leaders up to 500, they've learned how to be empowered, because you're the pastor. You kind of faced that battle long ago. You'll face that starting at 50 all the way up to 250. You become an expert of empowering people. But that next level, those leaders have got to stop thinking of themselves as leaders, and they have to start thinking of themselves as leaders of leaders. And that's a hard transition for many people. They don't, it's kind of a big picture thing, and it's a challenge. So during the season, I remember reading through that book, and I was really feeling like a failure and a disaster. And man, I was dealing with so many, replacing the, I won't tell you what department or ministry, but I was going through and having to replace this one, replace that one, having a challenge here, move people around almost every week. Somebody was wanting to quit or move, change ministry, feeling very discouraged. And I read through that, and I thought, hey, that's exactly what I'm facing. So it wasn't so much about personalities as it was, this is a natural part of progression, that my leadership and the leadership of our staff has got to change in order to move to that next level. So yes, to answer your question, growth barriers are absolutely real. I don't necessarily believe that the majority of it resides in the minds of the people as much as it does in the minds of leaders, and then those that follow under them. We really have to change the way that we pastor the church in order to break those barriers and how we lead.
So, okay. So then, so if there's a pastor that's facing that, maybe that 150 to, let's say 200, maybe 300, some of those barriers, how does the mindset of a pastor that maybe that's pastored from the 50 to 100, approaching that 150, 200, 250, how does it have to what's maybe the process for change, and what does it change into during that process, or as it approaches some of those barriers?
Yeah. So there's a basic rule of thumb for church growth, and you've probably heard this before, but it's a basic rule that is applicable to any size church, and that is that if you want to grow, if you want to double what you're attending right now, find a church that's twice the size you are, and start doing what they're doing. Ask yourself, is this scalable? If our church, if you're running 100, if we were running 200, could I continue as leader to do the things that I'm doing right now? To study the amount of time I'm studying now, to lead all the departments I'm leading now? Am I going to have the time to meet with every one of our individual leaders and make all the decisions that I'm making now? Or will I have to change? And so I think that's probably the sort of the baseline of church growth. Now, moving beyond where you are, I think every church is different, and every field is different. What works at some won't work at others. But I would say a good rule of thumb for pastors at any point where they feel like they're stuck is sort of take a step back and look at your purpose. Why are we doing what we're doing? 'em? And then start communicating that with your staff. Simon Sinek's book, 10 Commandments, is a great example of that. He says, if you want to grow, if you want to double what you're attending right now, find a church that's twice the size you are, and if you want to double what you're attending right now, find a church that's twice the size you are, and then start communicating that with your staff. Simon Sinek's book, Why. I don't know if you've read that, but it's
Yeah.
a tremendous book. You start with the why, and start looking at your purpose. Why are we doing what we're doing? What is the purpose of the ministries that we have right now? You can be extremely busy as a pastor, and yet much of what we do is just activity. We need to be honest enough to say, this ministry isn't working, and kill it. And then sometimes, even if a ministry is working, if it isn't aligned with our purpose, then we need to take a hard look at it and say, you know what, this is good, it's fun, I enjoy it, but it's not necessarily adding to our purpose. And it's not also related to our culture. And culture is a whole different animal. There's a tremendous book out by William Vanderbilt, I believe is his name. I think it's William. I know the last name is Vanderbilt. Ironically, I remember the last name, can't think the first name. But it's called Culture Wins. And in this book, he is talking about the importance of a business culture and how it's vital that we protect that culture. In Minnesota, you may not have the number of churches or the concentration of churches as a state or district like, say, Louisiana, but you do have a lot of churches there. And every one of the pastors in those individual churches are different. That we're all apostolic. We agree, hopefully, on the apostolic message and apostolic lifestyle. But there's very differences. There's things that you do, and every other pastor that's watching this does, that others would find very unusual, and yet you do it, and the church celebrates it. And so we all, it's kind of like you're kind of crazy. That's one of the things. And Bloom talked about is that you need to discover and protect your own kind of crazy. And you're going to have people transfer in from other churches. And but just because they're apostolic does not mean they have the vision that the pastor has. So as pastor, we have to, if we're going to break past those barriers, we need to do some soul searching, and we have to ask ourselves, what matters to me? What matters to our church culture? What do I want our church, what direction are we going? Why do we do the things that we do? Are we a friendly church? If we're not a friendly church, how do we become a friendly church? Are we having Holy Ghost breakthrough every service? Is our music as strong as it should be? How do we change that? How do we develop a part of the ministry that's frustrating us the most? Where's our weaknesses? How do we strengthen those? So we have to start looking at our strengths. I was talking to a pastor years ago who was frustrated with his music program, but he was sort of a bit intimidated, but they were growing, but they just weren't growing very quickly. Now he had been stuck, I think, on 30 people for 14 years, and had around 40 people when he started with about that many people. Wow. And just maintained, could not break that barrier. And so one of the things that I encouraged him to do, he was holding off on this. I want to hold off until I don't want to stream my services, for example. That was one thing. I don't want to stream my services until I have a better music program. I don't want to stream my services until our worship is a bit more demonstrative. And yet he was a tremendous speaker, one of the best preachers you've ever heard, Bible preachers and teachers. And people were coming every week to hear him preach and teach. You've got to determine what you're good at and what, what you promote as a pastor. Don't worry about your weaknesses as much as you highlight your strengths. And be careful not to compare yourself with everybody else. You have some things that you do that are unique to you, and celebrate them, protect them. I guess within reason, because there's some things that people do that are just crazy. But just protect that culture. Start kind of taking a step back and thinking through your processes. Every pastor that watches this is going to be frustrated with something. They're going to be challenged with something. And whatever that challenge is probably tied to the growth barrier that you're hitting. And but most of us we have these challenges in a particular area, whether it's Sunday school, kids ministry, youth ministry, music, whatever. We feel like, well, I've got to become strong in this, but I can't, I don't have time to focus on this because I've got to focus on all these other areas. And it leads to major frustration with pastors. And so if we're going to move forward, we have to be honest with ourselves and interrogate reality and really look at our personal health as well. What good does it do if you grow the church and you lose your marriage, or you grow the church and you hadn't prayed in 2 weeks? It's possible. And I think every pastor that's watching this can testify. It is entirely possible to do the spiritual work of God without being spiritual. We can all fall into that trap, and it's not healthy. And so you can only lead on empty for so long, and then you start making poor decisions and carnal decisions. And so I'm all about spiritual health. I love church growth and passionate about it, but we've got to be spiritually healthy, meaning you don't need to kill yourself. It's not about working harder. It's working smarter. And so taking a step back, I think is probably the first step, considering the churches that are twice your size, and then asking yourself, what are they doing that I'm not doing? How are they operating? And of course, one of the first things that you're going to come up with is they have more staff. Most people will say,
yeah,
I would do what they're doing, but I don't have people. And so growth barriers are often broke because pastors stop relying on themselves so much and start empowering people. Growth barriers, like anything else, they happen because of, they happen for a reason. There's typically, you've kind of got into this settling mindset where people are not inviting new folks and they're just maintaining. It was several years ago, I want to say it was the University of Montana that did a study on the subject of momentum.
Okay.
And this is something we started implementing after we moved into church today. I heard this, I forget exactly where I heard it, but we started incorporating it into our church practices. So in this study, it was a secular study, it wasn't about church, but they looked at 100 breakout companies whose stock was flatlining. There was no growth, or there was no new franchises, there was no new products, whatever it was. The company, in one way or another, was sort of flatlining in its existence. And then suddenly there was what they called a breakout moment. A breakout moment where the stock price just, took off. The number of franchises took off. The sales just took off. And so they traced out of those 100 breakout companies what that breakout moment was. And they discovered there was one of three things that happened. And there was a new leader, there was a new vision, or there was a new product. So a new leader for the company, a new vision for the company. This is, the direction we're taking the company, or there was a new product. And what happened in this study is they determined that when one of those three things happened, there would be this burst of momentum in sales, in franchising, or in, stock price. And so they determined that the formula for momentum, which works in any business, but I believe it works especially in churches, because we're not compelling people with money to come to our churches. This is all voluntary based, and we don't pay most of our workers. In most churches, I think the average is 95% of the work that is accomplished is done through volunteerism. So there has to be this natural drive by the leaders to create momentum. And so one of those three things is a way to get momentum going, but it's only for the short term. And so a new leader, a new vision, or a new product. In the case of the church, we don't have products, we have ministries. So anytime there's a new leader, let's say you get a new youth pastor, you get a new Sunday school director, expect that ministry to grow. It's going to happen. Not because they're a great leader. So they say, well, man, we were only running 20 in the youth. Now we're running 30 every week. Don't get the big head about it, because it's natural. You're going to have this burst of momentum with a new leader, a new vision. You as the pastor say, well, get up on Sunday morning or Sunday night and say, we are going to be a praying church. We're going to start meeting at the church every Sunday. I'm challenging everybody here to have a time of prayer. Whatever it is, you have this new vision, this new idea. God spoke to me. It's a new vision, momentum for the short term. Sure. And then finally, a new product or a new program. Anytime you create a new program within the church, you're going to have momentum. It's going to happen. So what we tried to do early on was put on the calendar every 2 weeks, we are going to establish some new thing every 2 weeks. Now, that carried us through several growth barriers, what they say were common growth barriers, and, with a whole lot of momentum. That will only create momentum. Those 3 new things will only create momentum for the short term. In order to maintain it for the long term, there's 3 levels. The second is improvement, significant improvement. So anytime you improve something, it needs to be significant, and you need to tell the church about it. And then the third level of momentum is an expectation of new. So anytime the church member says things like, well, I don't want to go on vacation because I don't want to miss a weekend around here. It's exciting. They don't even know, how to describe why they like coming to church. But it's the fact that you've made a practice of always introducing something new, something exciting. So anything that creates this almost imperceptible sound, this sound, that is the seed of momentum. So I would say to a pastor who feels like he's at a growth barrier, start focusing on what is it that you're doing new. Are you doing the same thing? Are you putting another notch on your belt? Oh, we got through another weekend, start thinking strategically. What am I going to do this coming Sunday? And it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It can be a vision. It can be a program, something that we did early on because we didn't have a lot of money. And I wasn't original with me. I heard a preacher talk about it. I sat down with a yellow legal notepad and started writing out the vision of the church just one evening. Our church is going to be a church that hosts conferences. I mean, this is when we were running, that 40 or 50, 60, we were less than 100. We're going to write materials. Our choir is going to record music. I mean, all this crazy stuff. And I'm just writing it all out on a notepad. And I probably filled up 9 pages. I went through every ministry of our church, every ministry I wanted to have in our church. And man, they were the biggest, the best, the brightest, whatever. And I talked about what I wanted them. I see this and I see that. I envision this, I envision that. And I took that and I stuck it in the pulpit. And the first time I read it as part of a sermon. That any time I felt like momentum was we're just sort of, getting through another service, I would pull that out right in the middle of my message. And with as much passion as I could muster up, I would read through that list again, and it would stir it up. People get excited about it because I'm reminding them about the vision of the church. But we would also do things like, buy new pot plants for the platform or new plants. Even if we have the money this week, let's don't do it this week. Let's save that for next week. I'm going to start a new sermon series. Sermon series is a great way to introduce something new, and it's something we do. We're going to preach anyway, but creating graphics and something that's brand new. This Sunday, I'm starting our brand new series. Whatever it was that gave those people the sense something new was started. And in marketing, it's super common. Go down to the grocery store and just look at how many products have the word new on them or some phrase that implies new or improved. They'll say things like, now crunchier, or now with more resin, I don't even know what resin is, but this one's got more of it. I want more of it.
You want more? Yeah.
Yeah. Why do they put that on the product? Why don't they just put it in the product? But they put it on the outside of the packaging because they know, research says that if you have the choice of normal or new and improved, you're going for new and improved 10 out of 10 times. So that was a big deal, using the formula for momentum to sort of drive you through some of those growth barriers that you face.
So maybe just to recap that, what you're saying is it's one of the three things to help the breakout, which is new leader, new vision, or new product, or perhaps new ministry, let's say. And then after you do that, it's a matter of improvement, or maybe showcasing or maybe recognizing the improvement that's there, and then delivering the expectation of something new.
Yes.
Is that kind of
the last one is basically the first two on a regular basis. That expectation of new is something that you'll just start to notice within the congregation, and people won't know how to describe it, but it's a systematic way. And we planned it. We put it on the calendar. We need something new for 2 weeks from now. What is it? We need something new for, well, that's when we're going to start that new ministry. Okay, let's don't announce it Wednesday night. Let's wait till Sunday. Sure. And then get to the point. Folks, I'm so excited about something brand new that I want to share with you. Okay, new, always new. Yeah. And so that sort of helps propel you through a lot of the mundane things that kind of hit you as pastor. One of the other things I would say, of course, I've got a lot of things in preparation. I've got a lot of ideas, but I want to just say most pastors need help. And one of the things that I guess there's actually two. Let me tell you where this idea came from. So we were at a big event. My wife was sitting in a big charismatic church that was hosting the event for a music group and Word Records, I think it was. And so we show up at this church, and we're sitting down in the audience, and they had 5 services. All of them, there was 4,000 people in all 5 services. And it was Brooklyn Tabernacle. So she was singing with them that day, and there was a lady that came in, and after the 4th service, and she said, I'm so excited that I get to work with y'all. And she said, man, I've been looking forward to this for a long time. And I said, well, great. What team are you on? She said, I'm on the D team. I said, the D team, what does the D stand for? And she said, it stands for D. And it took me a while to understand. She was a hostess, but she was on the D team, A, B, C, D.
Yeah.
And I said, well, how many do you have? She said, I think it goes up to J now. And instantly I was angry because we were doing good. And they're talking about the J team, and this one's on the D team. And for hostesses of things. And but I kind of came back, and it sort of stirred me up, because most of the church ministry is accomplished. I don't know if you've ever used the whole Pareto principle, depending on how you say it, where 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people in the church. But it seems to be consistent, where you have a majority of people in your church that are not doing anything. And then you have this few people that are doing everything. Yeah. And so one of the things that God spoke to me about was that our church would grow at the speed that I could get people involved in ministry, engage them in their personal ministry. And I'd always tried to do that, man. I always tried to push people, find a ministry. But the Lord really began to deal with me after that. And I was praying about it. Most mega churches in North America, especially in the charismatic variety, they have very little doctrine. They preach a lot of leadership principles and, sort of relational, psychological remedies, but they don't preach a lot of solid doctrine.
Sure.
They do have two doctrines. One of them is not really a doctrine. It's the doctrine, don't judge me. And they all preach it. Don't judge me,
Sure.
God looks, God looks at the heart, man looks on the outside. All this stuff, the scripture's taken out of context. But they all preach, that's one of their doctrines that they preach. Don't judge me. The second doctrine they preach and teach is the doctrine of serving. And that is actually a doctrine that I think, at least in the apostolic movement, has not been a strength. So one of the books, Nelson Searcy has a great book out on it, but where he asked the same question, what is your doctrine of serving? As a pastor, when you get somebody that's brand new into your church, we're apostolic. So when somebody comes in our church, the processes are different than if they would go into the Baptist church or this, Assembly of God church. If somebody walks into the Assembly of God church and they have natural charisma and leadership giftings, they can walk in and immediately be put in the Sunday school superintendent's position.
Sure.
And, and suddenly the Sunday school department is booming and growing because you've got this incredibly gifted person with natural leadership ability or even trained leadership ability. They're president of a bank or they're leading a company and they come in, they're going to do it the same way. They're going to have it together. They're going to have great staff meetings and, vision and all this stuff. Well, we can't really do that because we have the issue of discipleship.
Yeah.
And it's important to each of us. So, but that's one of the reasons I believe you see this incredibly almost like this rocketing growth in a lot of the charismatic churches is because they can use anybody and everybody. In the apostolic church, we're trying to grow a church that's ready for the rapture. And so we can't just put anybody in position. So we have to deal with this discipleship question. And the way that most of us do it, we really, at least in my case, up to that point, I'd never really sat down and thought through what is my doctrine of serving. And one of the books that I read, I thought had a really fascinating series of questions. If someone came to me and said, Pastor McKee, I'm too busy to go to church right now, my response would be, you're too busy. Or I'm too busy to pray right now. I'm working too many hours on my job. I've just got too much going on. I'm too busy to pray right now. Well, you're too busy. You need to change. Or I'm too busy to read my Bible right now. Too busy. But when it comes to serving in ministry, we take a different attitude. They say, well, Pastor, I'll come to church. I'll be faithful. I'll tithe and all that, but I'm just too busy to serve on any ministry teams right now. And we give them a pass and we say, I understand. You don't worry about it. You just go sit down in the pew and hopefully you can get back involved eventually. When the truth is, we need to change the way that we look at ministry. Ministry is not about getting the job done. It's about discipleship. You cannot become a disciple of Jesus Christ without putting a towel on your arm. And so anybody that says, I'm just too busy to serve, they might as well say, I'm too busy to go to church. Or, I'm too busy to pray. Because it's not about getting the job done. It's about what the job does to you personally. And, secular psychologists, psychiatrists will, they all understand this, even though they're, atheists or agnostics, they understand the power of serving.
Absolutely,
you feel bad, you feel depressed, you go serve in a soup kitchen, or you go find, they know there's something about the DNA, the way that we are built, that if you'll serve somebody else, you'll feel better about your own problems. They understand it changes you. It's not about the fact that they need people serving soup. It does something to you. And so I think that's one of the things that is pastors, if we're going to grow the church, we've got to change our attitude about ministry and stop looking at ministry as task oriented. This is about people. And so, preaching almost in every message about people discovering their purpose. You need to find out what God's calling you to do. You need to find out what it is that God is leading you into. And so that any person in that congregation that's not involved in a ministry, they realize, man, the one thing missing in my life and the reason why I'm not fulfilled is because I'm not serving in a ministry. And the more people that you get involved, the easier it is to overcome some of these church growth barriers. You're going to have people that are just gifted. And so that's one thing, changing our attitude about ministry. You know, we try not to say, hey, we got a job to do. We got some work up here at the church that needs to be done. We're trying to change our vocabulary a little bit and trying to say things more like we have ministry opportunities. If you hurry, you get all of the ministry opportunities. It's a great ministry opportunity. And so it's more about what ministry does to people than it is about getting the job. And then preaching that and teaching that, using the bully pulpit to talk about purpose. And, you know, if you're not happy, if you feel like fulfilled, it could be, but you're not doing anything for the Lord. You're not working on a ministry team, and you can't do everything. But what we try to encourage everybody to do is serve on a ministry team at least twice a month. Could you imagine if you right now doubled your volunteer base overnight? What would that take off your shoulders as a leader? I mean, suddenly you've got all this free time. Now, as leaders, sometimes, you know, we're fast-paced, we're task-driven, you know, especially for a D on the, you know, the DISC profile. And if you've ever used that DISC profile, tremendous program. But, you know, we want to get all these jobs done. And if you want something done right, you do it yourself. But the truth is, as long as you keep doing that, you're going to do that. And one of the hardest things to do as a leader is to let somebody try something that you believe from the top of your head to the sole of your foot, that's going to fail. That does not work here, especially if it costs you a little money. Sure. It's so hard to let people try new things, but it's so important if you change your purpose. My purpose is not to get jobs done. My purpose is to develop people, develop disciples. And so I'll give you an example. We had a young man, graduated from Bible college, came back home and was working for the church part-time. He came to me and said, Pastor, I want to have a fall festival out in the parking lot. We tried it before. It was a disaster. I mean, a disaster. Wasted a lot of money, spent $200, $300. I forget what it would cost us. And he was wanting to do it again. Yeah. Everything within me was screaming no. But I just felt the check and said, no, I'm going to let him learn. Now, that was my attitude. You know what? Let's let him figure it out for himself. Now, he was dogmatic, and he couldn't take my hints. I was trying to be discouraging to it, the idea. But I learned an important lesson in the middle of it. And I just told him, well, I can't be here for it. You know, you can try it. I'll let you try it. And that
was really encouraging, you know.
But the back of my mind, I'm thinking, he's going to learn, and that it's worth him learning that, you know, if I suggest something, bless God, he needs to go with what I suggest. But I let him do it anyway. And to my surprise, huge success. We had 8 families that weekend just from that fall festival. I mean, the parking lot was packed. And I learned something really important. Just because I tried something and failed doesn't mean somebody else with an entirely different personality, skill set can't try that same thing and succeed wildly at it. Everybody has their own unique giftings, and releasing people in ministry it's difficult. It's nerve-wracking. It's hard, especially if they fail before, to ever trust them with anything again. But releasing them in ministry is key to growing your staff, which is key to growing the church. And discovering what their gifts are. I mentioned the DISC profile. Something that we have done probably in the last 5 years or so is we've had every one of our staff members, if they're interested, once they're interested in ministry, we encourage them to take the DISC profile, and they have a letter beside their name. Are you familiar with the DISC profile?
Yep.
Okay, so dominant. I've got a little thing here I found, if it came up, dominant, interactive, conscientious, and supportive. And so anytime we're trying to build a committee or a team, we make sure that we know what their personality style is, their giftings are. And we try to put somebody in that position. For example, we don't want an I as the Sunday school superintendent, because they need to be the person teaching the kids, because they're the personality. They're not going to follow through with anything, but man, they're going to have a whole lot of fun. Everybody's going to love them. They're going to all gravitate towards them, but you don't want them keeping records for anything, because it'll be a disaster.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we sort of really drove our people to that and started identifying that. And what it allowed us to do as well is celebrate people's strengths, talk about this. And I appreciate that. But thank God for all the C's in our church, man. The C's are awesome. These keep the rest of us together. They're hard to read sometimes, but man, they take care of our calendars. The report that I mentioned earlier, there was a lady who was, man, she is all she puts that together every week. I'm a D, I'm big picture, but I can tend to run right over everybody else's feelings and sort of down everything and just leave a lot of the C's very frustrated because they don't know what's happening. I'll make a call that comes to mind. This is what we're going to try. We're going to do this, and all the C's are like, well, I need more information. You can almost feel it sometimes like they're challenging you, but the truth is they need that information, because once you sit down and explain to a C will see things in your plan that maybe you haven't noticed. Sure. And they'll help you work through some of the details. So, and then once you get a C on board, man, you got them for life. They're amazing. They'll help you make it all work. So anyway, driving the people towards that, getting more people involved in ministry, promoting ministry within your messages, getting everybody in the church involved in a ministry. And then I would say this one thing, which I don't know how we're doing on time, probably going way over, but have so that we can maintain our apostolic identity. At this point, if you're going to move into this room, people involved, you really need to think through your requirements for activity or for ministry, and what really use what we call ministry covenants. Every growing church that we've come across has used some version of a ministry covenant as part of their discipleship program. In other words, we don't wait for people, or you come here for 6 months and then you can get involved. People need to feel they're involved early on. So going through all the ministries in the church and establishing shallow ends of the pool in every ministry department. There's shallow and there's deep. And have those established, be ready to enforce them. You have to enforce them. And so as you go through the ministry covenants, which I can say examples, in a little packet that I sent out to another district, but as you go through all of your ministry covenants, take out everything that's not enforceable, or things that you won't enforce. For example, most job descriptions that we used to have years ago had the fruit of must maintain the fruit of the Spirit. Well, when's the last time that you pulled somebody off of the drums because they weren't meek?
Sure. Right.
Yeah. And so if you can't enforce it,
how do you measure that? How do you measure meekness?
Exactly. You can't measure it. Yeah, you can't. So basically, go through your ministry covenants and only put things in there that you as pastor would be willing to pull them off the drums if they violate this, basically. So it has to be enforceable, all the things there that are enforceable. And then, and really, as pastor, you're going to have to make that decision. Now, what we have done now is just to help us, we've asked our ministry leaders to go ahead and create those levels of ministry and then send them to us to review. And I make changes or whatever. So you don't have to create everything.
Sure.
Then, of course, once we get all those ministry covenants, we turn them over to one of our great C people, and they make them all look uniform, clean them all up. It looks wonderful. But what it does is it creates different levels. And I'll give you an example. Somebody that comes to our church, typically, they want to be involved in our music program. They want to sing in the choir. Our choir ministry covenant is an entry level. So basically, now we don't have any covenants that say show up you can minister. Everything requires something, because my goal is not just to get them involved. My goal is to offer involvement, but ask something from them. Get them to make some kind of step of commitment. So, basically, let's say that somebody walks in our church and looks like TBN threw up all over them, man. They just covered, everything, whatever. Well, you want to give them opportunity to get involved because they're ready. They love the church. Maybe they've just been baptized in Jesus' name, filled with the Holy Ghost. They're ready to get involved. Give them some requirements. And the way that we have done this with some of our shallow end ministries is we'll tell them, okay, basically, you need to look like an apostolic anytime you're on campus. But don't worry if we see you at Walmart or, grocery store, don't duck and hide from us because, wearing pants or something like that. We understand you're a new convert. Now, if somebody's been living for God a long time and they kind of go there, we can have that conversation separately still because I'm the pastor and I can talk about direction or whatever. Yeah. But it gives those people a guideline. And what we found is once they start doing it for campus, I don't care if they know why. I don't care. If you were to go to the average person in one of our calls to churches and ask them why, the ladies, why don't you wear pants? Or the men, why is your hair short? Or, why don't we drink? All those things, they can't tell you why. They just do it. And so they're going to hear why, because we're having we'll do a holiness series, a couple of them throughout the year. They'll understand eventually. But at this point, when they're brand new, I don't care if they know why. Now, we have classes, discipleship classes, they can get involved. But I want them to find a place, find ministry as quickly as possible. So they can start feeling like this is their church. Now, let's say the choir, entry level, the praise team, that's a whole other level, man. That's the boot camp. That's the special forces, man. You got to fast one day a week, man. You're lining up. Of course, you're apostolic all the time. You have complete liberty over Facebook, which is something we put on our covenants a while back. If we reserve the right to veto anything on social media. No questions asked. You don't get to argue. If I call you up, it's going to be rare. If I call you up and say, take that down, you take that down. Okay. I mean, those are the kind of issues that pastors deal with. So put them on your ministry covenant. Yeah. And then we always put a place on the bottom where they have to sign. And so when there's a correction issue, I don't have to sit down with somebody and try to prove why they shouldn't cut their hair, why they shouldn't wear makeup. All I have to do is say, are you still wanting to sing in the choir? Because remember, your ministry covenant says you're not supposed to wear that. So if you can go and take that off, or it's okay if you don't want to sing in the choir anymore, that's all right. But it stops becoming personal, and it just points back to what they've already agreed to do. So anyway, the ministry covenants are a huge deal, and I'd be happy to give you guys some examples of them. I didn't create them all. Actually, I think Dr. Wilson, Eugene Wilson, he created a few of them. I created a few. And we had two of our good disc profile C people that did some of the other ones. And they can, but I'll send those over to you. But those ministry covenants are powerful. It also gives you a good opportunity to have a yearly review as well, because the chances are good. How long have you been pastoring there?
Myself, just coming up on 3 years. Yeah.
Okay. So you've probably had some changes in department leaders already.
Yeah.
Okay. And you've had to deal with that. Most of the time, when you feel that need for a change, there's a good chance those people felt the change too. They felt like, or they were unhappy, they weren't fulfilled. And we haven't really provided a way for them to transition into something else, because it's all about the job, instead of about what's God calling you to do. Sure. And so when you have a yearly review, sometimes it gives people an opportunity to say, well, I can serve another 2 months, and then I'll sit down in my review and I'll talk to pastor about this. But I would really like to move out of Sunday school. I want to move over to youth ministry. I want to move into the music ministry, whatever it is. But it takes away all the shock and the frustration of having to have those conversations and move people out, all that kind of stuff. And allows you to really kind of go over it. Sometimes people think that they're doing a good job, but they haven't read their ministry or covenant in a while, or their job description in a while. And so it allows you an opportunity every year to kind of sit down and go over all those things again.
Sure.
The ministry covenants are awesome. We run a lot of our discipleship through that, but it's a great way to get new people involved where the pastor's not having to promote it all the time. Your ministry leaders can start tapping shoulders, getting people involved in ministry, and then you don't have to make those calls, because when the Sunday school superintendent goes up to somebody in the church and they're saying, hey, listen, I want you to get involved, whatever, there's not a lot of ambiguity. You've already made the decision on the requirements for those people. They can still send it to you. For example, they'll submit something to me that says, hey, listen, I want to ask the following people, and I check the tithing, or my secretary checks the tithing. We have a whole system for, how we go over the tithing, make sure they're tithing. But then once that's in place, then they hand them a ministry covenant and they read over it. They know exactly what they're getting into. And they make the decision. They sign at the bottom, and then we celebrate it. Ministry department leader, I used to do it all. Now the ministry department leaders will pray with them over their ministry covenant, so they'll take it seriously.
Sure.
And it's more about what getting involved in ministry does for me. And it's a great way to double your volunteers if it's always about discover your ministry, discover your purpose. So hopefully that will help some guys that are hitting the ceiling on church growth or church growth barrier.
Sure. Yeah.
Is to get more people engaged in their ministry.
Sure.
So anyways, to answer that question, I know I talked for a while.
No, that's good. So is that something you would say is one of those things that you kind of, as a pastor, if you're wanting to maybe open up opportunities for other people, but you have people that maybe are stuck at a certain covenant level and they're not advancing, and
Sure.
there are people that are maybe underneath that kind of wanting to advance, but there's no room for them at that level, because there are certain people that they never want to advance past the choir or the covenant level that's there. How do you manage with some of those things? Because you don't want to stunt growth for people that are wanting to advance, but other people that are just kind of about.
Right. Well, I would say there's a couple of things. One is trust the Holy Ghost and use the Holy Ghost. That's their greatest strength.
Mm-hmm.
And aside from that, the bully pulpit. So helping people discover their ministry, God will lead people. Yeah. The Bible says the Spirit would lead us and guide us into all truth. It'll lead people to a deeper commitment. So if people are not moving forward, it's because they're not listening to the voice of the Spirit. So whatever level they're on, stir up the Spirit. I mean, your AV team, for example, you got shallow end, deep end pools of ministry. One of the things that we started encouraging our ministry team leaders in our AV department to do is pray with your people. Get them all together and start praying and have a little, 30-second talk. Man, thank God for what we're doing. We're making a difference. We're sending the gospel out around the world. And, the people that come through your eyes and your ears will, be 10 times the number of people that are sitting in this building. Sure. And really make it a spiritual matter, and God will start leading them to the next level. Now, in the example that I gave the choir, for example, they're at the choir level. One of the things that my wife will strategically do is when she's having choir practice, she will intentionally talk about some of the great things that the praise team is doing. Man, I'm so excited. We got this new song. I want y'all to hear this, whatever this cool song is. And that's what our praise team is doing this week. Okay. And you're sort of enticing them. Come on to the next level. You can do it. And Yep. Because the minute that they're reaching out for that, it comes with requirements. Sure. It comes with more commitment. And I don't want anybody picking up the trash at our church without having some kind of ministry covenant that they get involved in. If they show up for, we got a thing coming up here in a few weeks. What is it? Feeding the homeless or something like that. And they're packing up some bags. We're not actually doing it at our church. We're doing it at a place in the city. We want a ministry covenant for that. We want them to have a serving covenant. So everybody shows up at the church. It's pretty basic, but it's a ministry covenant that I agree to do this and I get to do this. Yeah. So, but those ministry covenants are powerful, man. And, on that note, several years ago, actually before we really started pushing this whole ministry covenant idea, we had job descriptions, but they weren't really working. They were too long. We encourage all of our leaders to try your best to get your ministry covenant down to 1 page, at the most 2 pages. If you have a lot of things, they're not going to remember any of them.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So, but somebody asked me on Sunday morning one time, they said, well, what does it take to be a member of your church? And I gave them an answer, because I'm the pastor. I know, at that time, I think we were running probably 150, and it had been fairly fast growth, I guess. And then somebody met me that night, Pastor, I love the service. Tonight it was awesome. We want to be a part of this church. And they asked me the same question: how do we become members? And I gave them an answer. And almost as soon as I finished, I turned around and I thought, that was a different answer. It was similar, but it was a slightly different answer.
Yeah.
And I asked my wife, I said, if I'm the pastor, and if I can't give an ABCDE for how to become a member of the church, how do any of these people that call themselves members of our church know what membership is about?
Yeah.
And so basically, I took all of our requirements for membership and I shredded them, pulled a Nancy Pelosi, tore them all up. And and then I came up with 5 requirements, actually 4 requirements for membership originally, and then we added the 5th. So the 4 requirements are: obey the simple gospel, death, burial, resurrection, repentance, baptism, Jesus' name, filling the Holy Ghost. We talked about that. Second one is faithful to the best of your ability to all regular church services. So, and if you miss, we request that you call or you email. And we use a little service called Grasshopper. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Sure. Yeah.
We created an extension where they call. It's called the absentee number. They dial the same church number, and they dial 777, and they leave a message with their name and a reason, so that anytime that they miss. The third thing is 100% faithful in tithing and offering. You don't miss a month. If you go an entire month and you haven't tithed, you will be asked to step down from the choir. You will be asked to stop teaching Sunday school until you tithe again. We don't do the whole timeout. You go sit in the corner for 4 months. For us, it's just because most of the time when people forget things like that, the average conversation, I'll get a report on Sunday mornings once a month that has the list of names. Most of the time, it's people that are out of work, but I'll see 2 or 3 names on here. And my secretaries have kind of learned to vet through that list. But when we were doing it originally, I would go through it and look. But if I'd have 2 names, and my conversation would be something like, hey, Brother Wilson, hey man, do you have a second? Pull them aside Sunday morning. Are you still involved in the Sunday school part? Yeah, I'm still involved. Are you teaching this morning? Yes, sir, I'm teaching this morning. Okay. The reason why I was asking was I just got my report on tithing, and we don't show any kind of tithing for this month or last month. Oh, and usually the answer is something like, I'm so sorry, Pastor. My wife, I was on vacation, or my wife's out of town. She was sick. She usually does that, and all yada, 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 whatever the reason is. But again, I've got a ministry covenant that says that they're going to be a tither.
Yeah.
So my response is, oh man, don't stress about it. Don't worry about it. Do you have your checkbook? If you want to stop by the office right before church, if you have your checkbook, stop by the office, or a debit card, whatever you want to go ahead and tithe before service. Just let me know when you do. And then, we can, make sure you can get involved, but otherwise let me know. And so we can find somebody else to teach Sunday school.
Sure. That.
And then just walk away. But anyway, what happens is that happens once or twice. They never do it again.
Sure.
And so anyway, I'm sorry that I got distracted. So obey the simple gospel, faithful to the best of your ability to all regular church services, 100% faithful in tithing and offering. They have to show both. And then the 4th thing is abstain from gossip. Nothing kills revival in a church like gossip. So abstain from gossip. And the 5th is be active in ministry, find a ministry. So we made that a part of our requirements for active membership. And anyway, that really helps sort of pull a lot of new people in. And we also celebrate people getting involved in ministry. I take about 3 or 4 minutes before the choir sings on Sunday night, and it almost happened as a accident, but I started giving out towels, ministry towels. So and so found their towel in ministry, and I called them out, and we all celebrate them, clap our hands, whatever. But anyway, those ministry covenants are kind of secondary to the covenant that they have in membership. But anyway, does that answer your question? I know I've been talking a whole lot, probably too much.
No, it's good. No, I appreciate it. I think that kind of helps to maybe lay some foundational groundwork to kind of what we're talking about, and also gives some real practical things as well. I mean, none of this is something that just kind of you landed on, I suppose, right? I mean, it's just something that's continually developed over time.
Yes, sir.
Do you tweak it,
all
regularly?
Okay. Yeah. All the time. Yes. Well, I say all the time. Some of the systems we've been using for a long time, ministry covenants at this point, the whole formula for momentum, that's been going almost since year 2. The keeping track of numbers, that started early on. We were still home mission status. And always been driven to try to get people involved in ministry. Not real successful at it until about, say, 8 years ago, when it started becoming a part of our culture.
Sure.
And I mentioned, let me just say this one last thing, and then I'll stop talking about all this stuff. But recognizing volunteers is something we don't do naturally. Celebrating them. For the most part, we celebrate the fact that so-and-so used to be a drug addict, and now he's a preacher of the gospel. So-and-so used to, walk the streets, but bless God, now she's up here singing for Jesus. What do we do for the people that do not feel a call to be a preacher or a singer?
Yeah.
How do we celebrate them? Celebrating the person that's a Sunday school teacher, or that's an usher, or that's an AV worker, whatever you hang from the ceiling, Bill Walton said. Was it Bill? No, Sam Walton, not Bill Walton. But Sam Walton said, whatever you hang from the ceiling, you'll sell. And so whatever you celebrate, you're going to duplicate. So if you need more people involved in ministry, celebrate the ones that are in ministry. And so I was preaching a sermon series years ago called The Supernatural Power of the Towel. And I had this harebrained idea that I was going to order enough towels for everybody in the church. And at the end of it, I was going to have them all come up and get a towel. And the theme that year was first the kingdom of God. But it didn't work out that way. Right in the middle of my message, I was walking around and I said, I just want to celebrate the fact this person is, they show up every week, this next person, and, they're at the door, they're always friendly. They don't talk a whole lot, but man, they're some of the friendliest people that you'll ever meet. A lot of guests say when they walk in, these are some of the first people that made friends with them. And so tonight I want to celebrate Brother Sean Wilson, and I hand him a towel. Nobody knows who it is until that moment I call his name. Yeah. And then I start talking about some other person, describing them. And then I walk over and hand him a towel. I wasn't really prepared for the emotional response that it got. Because after that first, people coming up and saying, Pastor, I want my towel. I want my towel. And so I started doing that every week, just for the sermon, I would just start talking about these next 2 people that I'm talking. They're new to our church, or they've been with our church for about 3 years now, and they've served in this ministry, this ministry, and they have the giftings of help. So, just build them up a little bit, and then I say, let's all put our hands together. Let's celebrate brother and sister Godair. Come on, and then brother and sister Godair walk down, and I hand them, thank you for finding your towel, and everybody's applauding them. And it just sort of turned into this super emotional event that happens. And people are posing with their towel after church. They're hanging on their wall, having it framed, put on their, up in their home. And so we tried to start incorporating that into our culture, and even started celebrating some of our young people. There, There was one of ladies in our church. She had a 7-year-old son who came up to me and said, Pastor, I want you to know my son. I know he's young, but my son really wants to find his ministry. Good kid. Just his family's been a part of our church for a long time. And his grandfather was back, one of our main sound men. Dad plays the guitar. His mom is one of our C's that always, just has everything organized. Well, this young kid's always sitting in the front row with a tie. And I said, well, yeah, absolutely. Once he finds a ministry, make sure you let me know. The head usher came up and said, he came up and talked to me. And so I'll tell you when I put him on the schedule. Well, that following Sunday night, he came up and said, Pat, I'll let you know, Chase Sharp is serving for the first time tonight.
Wow.
And when the ministry had found is he would go up and put all the bottles of water on the platform for the ministers and the singers and the musicians. Wow. And so I said, are you sure, tonight? Oh, yeah. So choir starts and I announce a few people and give out a few towels. And then I start talking about this young kid that had a passion for a ministry and wanted to be involved in ministry. And talked about the ministry that he'd found just briefly, very quick, probably 15 seconds or so. And then I called his name, Chase Sharp. And he was sitting in the lap of his grandfather back in the back sound booth. Mm-hmm. And he comes out of the sound booth and he's holding his chest and he's almost travailing. He's crying so hard. And he's walking down the aisle. Of course, the choir's standing behind me. All of them are just, tears are pouring. And he is so honored to be getting a towel. And he walks up and I give him the towel. He says, thank you. And he takes that towel and he's holding it tight. And he's walking down the aisle just weeping, squeezing that towel. And man, it was that moment that God spoke to me. And it just sort of affirmed, we got it. It's part of our culture now.
Sure.
And after that was over with, I started having little kids come up to me and say, Pastor, I want to find my towel. I want to get my towel in ministry. Mm-hmm. And when you can somehow make it part of their culture, all of the struggles that we're having at growing, really it comes back to volunteers. Getting more people involved creates more excitement. And then everybody has their own little circles of influence, and people start seeing their attendance differently now that they're a leader in the church and they're involved in the church. And so anyway, but that whole towel thing was sort of a accident, how it happened at first, but it has carried us on, and it's sort of feeds that culture of discovering their gift, discovering what God's called them to do.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Very cool. Super practical, but also obviously very, very impactful, obviously not just to him, but to kind of the rest of the church. And some of these, people tell their friends it's something that they can kind of share, and people want to be a part of that,
Yes, sir.
And you don't have to maybe beat that into people. It's just like you said, it's just part of you created that culture in the church, but it was very intentional to do that. Very cool.
Absolutely. And it works for any church of any size. Mm-hmm. It's just people discovering, what God's called them to do. Probably, maybe that's the root of a lot of pastors' frustrations, is we're sticking people in jobs that they are not passionate about.
Sure.
They're a great outreach person, but they're a horrible outreach director. Sure. Because they're not good at, that's not their giftings. We sort of force people into the jobs because we're task driven. We're not really about them discovering their giftings.
Sure.
We do all of the personality tests and all the giftings tests and all that kind of stuff. We do a lot of that, probably default to a lot of that, and have classes about discovering your ministry. But there's something powerful about finding your place in ministry. I assume you're married. You have kids?
Yes, 5. Yeah.
5. Holy moly. Wow. So, but if we, my wife and I, we invite another couple over and we're making them dinner. I'm not making them dinner. My wife's making them dinner. And
right. For sure.
One of the first things that we say is, or one of the first things that they'll say is, hey, what can I help you with? Usually it's the woman, at least. The men don't really care, but women will, the visiting woman will say, what can I help you with, sister? And we say things like, nothing, you just go over and relax and you take it easy. Just don't worry about a thing. Well, the reason why they're asking you is because they feel silly just sitting there while you're working. If you really want them to relax, give them a job.
Something to do. Sure.
If you really want them to calm themselves and enjoy themselves, give them something to do and put something in their hand. Go put the ice in the glasses, toss a salad, whatever, but find a job to do. And I think that's the same principle that we can apply to our guests. When our new people come, give them something to do. And they're going to relax. They're going to be more open to our doctrine, to our teaching, discipleship, everything else. But again, we can't just throw back the door. We got to have some sort of a system for discipleship because we're apostolic,
Absolutely.
So anyway,
all right.
Well, man, I think we have covered the entire hour and a half.
I think so. Obviously, very, very easily. And I think I've probably generated maybe a dozen more questions that I could probably ask. I'll probably send them your way. But
well, I think we've got another session scheduled, don't we?
We've got one in May and then one in August.
Okay, tremendous.
So,
well, if they don't get sick of listening to me by now, then hopefully we can get back into it in May.
Absolutely.
But I enjoyed it, man. And I will send you a copy of the ministry covenants. And what else was there? I think that was it. Ministry covenants. So, but if you give me your email address, I think I've got it. I should have it. You've emailed me a couple times. Yep. I'll send that over to you.
Absolutely.
And we will tackle it then. Maybe next time something we could talk about would be prioritization. I know that's a big challenge with a lot of churches. I know when we were starting out, we'd go to a conference and I'd get 500 ideas.
Right.
And it was overwhelming. I wanted to pull my hair out because, man, there's just so many things. There's some really cool tools that you can use to sort of prioritize what you need to work on first. And in the church, some sort of self-diagnostic type things that's really neat that we don't have to get into it now. We can talk about it in May, you said? In May, yep. May the 19th, yep. Cool, wonderful, awesome. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I hope that it helps somebody, and hopefully I haven't talked too much. No, this has been great, and I think this is great to kind of give us some foundational and very practical things to look at. And what we'll do in between now and May is obviously be in discussion, but a lot of our pastors are going to follow up with them and ask them after they've had a chance to look at this, what questions do they have? Maybe we can kind of set up some sort of way to kind of figure out some of the questions that they it'd be fun are facing after that. So, and I'd love to hear some successes, things that they've done as well. It's great. Mm-hmm. Great. I enjoy this kind of conversation, man. Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, man, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. And if you have any questions, anything else that I can handle in between, just please feel free to reach me. And, but it's been an honor to be a part of this conversation. I love the District of Minnesota. It's one of my favorite places to go. And you guys have tremendous leadership there. So thank you for allowing me to be a part. Well, thank you for being part of it. We don't have any outro music like Ministry Central does, but I can try to play my guitar over there. So yeah, let's do that. Next time. Next time. All right, man. Well, thank you, Brother McKee. God bless you. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.